Go ahead and start. Hi, I'm Cal Stubb, and I'm going to be giving a talk on how your clothes should fit. So first I'm going to ask my cameraman to pan over the audience. Alright, so how many times have you been asked, or how many times have you been given presents by your parents? That's usually a form of clothing, and they normally tell you, like, don't worry about it, you know, it's a size or two big right now, but eventually you'll grow into it. It's a pretty frustrating thing to get, I'm assuming. So what I want to talk to you about now is a better idea of how clothes should fit. So to kind of give you some background as to why I have some authority on talking about this, I've got two reasons. So one, clothing is a pretty big hobby of mine. I greatly enjoy fashion, I keep up with the trends. I'm normally watching runway shows as they're coming out. So it's something that I really delve into. And two, I'm pretty active on a men's fashion forum, so I generally tend to give advice, post some of my own outfits, get some feedback, give some feedback, so I've got some credential in that sense. So I want to go ahead and move on to my speech and just kind of give you an introduction of my main points. So what I'm really trying to do with this is to try to build some self-confidence for some people and just kind of give a better understanding of how your clothes should fit, how to measure yourself, some general rules and guidelines that you need to follow in order to properly present yourself, and a few ideas on experimenting with your outfits. So first thing that you definitely need to know is how to measure yourself. This is going to be one of the most cornerstone aspects of it. So as you can see with this diagram, it's giving you pretty general guidelines as to how to measure yourself. So with the chest right underneath the arms, just get a circumference. With the sleeve length, you know, you want your sleeves to go all the way down to the end of your arm, right where the wrist meets the palms. That's the ideal sleeve length. And then it's also going to kind of talk about the bottom half of your body that you need to measure. So the waist is, of course, going to be important to make sure that your pants fit you properly. And then the inseam is another huge aspect. That essentially dictates how much of a break or how much creasing is going to be at the end of the pants. And I'm going to get into a little bit more about break a little later on. So now, once you've kind of got a pretty general guideline of how to measure yourself, you get a measuring tape, you kind of go around those red dotted lines that you saw in the previous image, you're going to learn how to apply those measurements on how your clothes are going to fit. So if you go to a store, maybe you're shopping online, you're going to see a size chart that kind of tells you your chest circumference has to be 42 inches if you're a large. Your sleeve length is going to be 36 inches. Again, more measurements for a specific item of clothing. So once you've been able to measure yourself, you can kind of use those measurements and apply them to that online chart and figure out which item of clothing and what size is going to fit you best. So as you can see with the shirt, he's wearing an extremely well-fitted shirt. So everything is pretty much right where it needs to be. The shoulder seams are ending right at the shoulders. The sleeves are ending right where the palm and the wrist meet. There's not too much billowing with this shirt. It's kind of tapered to his body without being extremely constricting. And then with the bottom block, obviously you want to make sure that your pants fit. Ideally, you don't need to wear a belt to keep your pants up. The belt should serve more as an accessory piece. And although this does talk specifically about chinos or khaki pants, as most of you have heard, the rules that he has listed out here kind of actually generally tend to go with how you want your pants to fit. So in this, I'm going to go a little bit more into detail about how your suits are going to fit. So with the suits, obviously you want to make sure that the shoulder seams end right at the shoulders. You want to make sure that your sleeve length is going to be ending right at the wrist bone, and this is kind of where the break aspect comes more into play. So the break is where the pants meet the shoe. Ideally, you don't want to have too much of a breaking, otherwise it's just not going to look professional. What you want is about a half break and keeping it kind of conservative in some environments. So after that, another important little thing to keep in mind is that there are other rules and conventions. So you ideally want to be able to match your belt with your shoes. And another important thing to keep in mind with how your clothes fit is drape. So draping is essentially the idea of how a piece of clothing falls under its own weight. So I'm wearing this shirt right now. It seems to be draping pretty well. There's nothing pulling it. There's nothing kind of making it look more awkward than it needs to be. But say I were to scrunch up the back and be wearing a shirt that's too small. Obviously you can see that the stripes are getting pretty twisted and they're getting kind of warped. And that's an indicator that the shirt or the item of clothing you're wearing is just not draping well enough. And along with drape, you're going to kind of want to understand a few of the regional differences that you're going to see in the fits of your clothing. So in the first image you can see it's kind of a more Americanized fit. So this is what you'd see typically if you're up north, closer to the New York area. Very inspired by American workwear, as is evidenced with the jeans and the boots. There's a very key components to how an American might wear his clothes. Everything is pretty tapered, everything is very well fitted, but not tight. And then we can move on to the European style, which is right in the middle. So with the Europeans, it's going to be a little bit tighter, a little bit more tapered, and kind of edgy, so to say. So as you can see, he doesn't have any break with his pants. In fact, there's a pretty decent sized gap between his loafers and the end of his pants. And that's generally how they're going to be. So with the far image, as you can see, it's a Japanese man. So with the Japanese, it's pretty unique because from the time they're children to the time they graduate school, they don't wear anything else besides school uniforms. So once they get out, they've got a little bit more time to experiment with how they want to wear their clothes, which is where you see that image coming in. So it's completely different from the other two images because it's not as rigid and as structured as some of the other outfits. You can see the pants have a great deal of break. You can see that his shirt is excessively long and that he's also wearing a very deep scoop neck shirt underneath. So these are items that you don't typically see if you're going to try to understand fit. And with that, I can talk a little bit more about experimentation. So with the experimentation, an important thing to keep in mind is proportionality. So proportionality is just maintaining your body's natural figure. So if you've got a long torso, you don't want to overemphasize that long torso. So you'd wear shirts that fit maybe a little bit shorter to make your body look a little bit more idealized. And then, so that's going to kind of cover some parts of the experimentation aspect. So now you guys have a pretty good idea of how to measure yourself, how to kind of buy clothes to see how they're going to fit you the best. You kind of have a basic guideline of how your suit should fit, a few rules and regulations, and an idea about how different cultures can wear different clothing. So with that, now you'll never need to come to your mom or come to your dad and say, hey, this shirt is actually too big for me. You'll never have to encounter the problem of having shirts and having clothes that are 1 or 2 sizes too big with the assurance that you are going to grow into them. Thank you.